I'd like to thank the Saskatchewan Library Association again for hosting One Book, One Province. Please take some time to listen to Paul as he goes through some of his readings from his book, Blanket Toss Under the Midnight Sun. I want you to sort of go back as well. Some of you that are young, you might be intrigued by this, to actually have somebody read a book to you. Some of us that are a little bit older, I want you to reflect back. I'm remembering being on the reserve, closing my eyes, listening to the radio, and the occasional evening, a story would be told over the radio. It was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. So I think by doing this as well, you'll now enter another part of my world, to be reintroduced to storytelling in a different form as well, by being orated to you. So please, if this entices you to pick up a book, or actually read the entire book, please, I'm hoping your yearning for learning and reading is intrigued by the Saskatchewan Library Association continuing to invest in literature and new literature that's starting to arise in the province. So thank you again, Jay Miigwech. Have a great day.
Okay, I think we'll get started. I'll let in people as they decide to join us, but I think we have enough people here to get started. So, hello everyone, and welcome to One Book, One Province. Please keep your speakers on mute and only speak if Les Oystryk calls on you. If you would like to ask a question, please use the chat feature. One Book, One Province aims to increase literacy and to create a reading culture by providing opportunities for residents to become more socially engaged in their community through a shared story. One Book, One Province encourages Saskatchewan's social, economic, and cultural development while supporting libraries and collaborations. SLA's work and support reaches lands covered by Treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, the traditional lands of the Cree, Dakota, Dene, Lakota, Nakota, and Saulteaux people, and homeland of the Métis. The Saskatchewan Library Association extends sincere thanks to the Saskatchewan Writers Guild for their continued sponsorship of this program. Just going to invite some people in. Okay. Paul Seesequasis is a Willow Cree writer, journalist, and cultural advocate and commentator currently residing in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Since 2015, he has curated the Indigenous Archival Photo Project, an online and physical exhibition and archival Indigenous photographs that explore history, identity, and the process of visual reclamation. His writing has appeared in the Globe and Mail, The Walrus, Brick and Granta magazines, among others. He has been active in the Indigenous arts, both as an artist and a policymaker since the 1990s. A warm welcome to Paul Seesequasis.
Tanse, am I on?
Yes.
Thanks, Sean, and welcome to you all, and to this Zoom, and everyone in Orange and surrounding areas, or wherever you happen to be. I'm speaking to you from a very almost summer-like day here in Saskatoon, and a gorgeous day. You can feel spring in the air. And I'm just happy to share this with you, to share this hour with you, and to talk a bit about Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun, which came out October 2019, at the end of October, and I'm happy and honored that it's part of One Book, One Province from the Saskatchewan Library Association. I wish I could be in La Ronge in person, but as we know, we're going through, hopefully coming out of extraordinary times, and it's just great to be with you virtually. Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun was around, kind of emerged out of the Indigenous Archival Photo project that Sean mentioned. The idea was presented to me to actually turn it into a book. And rather than, because the photo project itself involves hundreds of photos, literally, that have been posted on social media. People have identified their aunties, uncles, grandfathers, etc. And whole narratives have developed from that. Putting together a book really meant kind of focusing on certain areas, else the book would just be too big. So the book kind of focused on 8 areas or 8 regions. And based on the photographs, the narratives kind of flowed out of that. What would often happen is I'd post a photo, say on Facebook, and people would say, that's my auntie, that's my uncle. And then this whole stream of oral narrative developed from the photos themselves. And that was, for me, an extraordinary and rewarding process. So what I'd like to do is just read a few selections from it. And then Les and I will go into a conversation. And you can see the photos running, and they can just run, Sean, as I read. That's fine. What I'm going to read first is from Cape Dorset, which is now Kingate, and Inuk artist Kanuwak Oystryk, who was a pivotal artist in the emerging Inuit art scene in Cape Dorset. And we'll see a photo shortly of her, that's her right there, exiting her tent with her son Adami. And her star is already rising quickly. Kanuwak was a powerhouse in the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative, along with Kanagik Putagik. Up until her death in 2013, Kanuwak contributed many prints, and her work sold exceptionally well. She became quite possibly the most famous Inuit artist in the world, known for her prints Enchanted Owl and Return of the Sun, which appeared on Canadian stamps, and Red Owl, which the Royal Canadian Mint included on quarters in 1999. At every print collection from the very beginning, Kanuwak's art was much in demand, providing essential revenue for the emerging cooperative. A founding member and early signatory to its establishment, she was a seminal part of Cape Dorset and the creative culture surrounding it. According to John Houston, the Inuit in Kingate realized a couple of things right away. And one of them was that the co-op was a kind of an extension of the already timeless way, Inuit way of being in the world, an extension of Inuit traditional knowledge, and the necessity and benefits of working together in the Arctic. The tent from which she is emerging is typical of the period. The tents were canvas and kept scrupulously clean. They were highly portable and often moved. The tent served as both Kanuwak's living quarters, where she raised her children, and her studio. The builders salvaged materials from the sea or from ships that arrived and installed a wooden door rather than having to use a less convenient flap. Kanuwak was very close to all her children, as evidenced by one of her sons, Adami Oystryk, in the carrier hood of her mati, and her older son, Arnik, in the background. The design of the amate and the carrier hood fosters a wonderful closeness between parent and children. When growing up, they're constantly in and out of the hoods, being snuggled and always able to feel the warm proximity of their mother. This intimacy from infancy creates a strong sense of self and of being an accepted member of the community. In the photograph, Kanuwak is wearing a summer-style mate with bands on the sleeves that are very distinctive of Cape Dorset. Being a coastal settlement, there was a long tradition of trade and barter with whaling ships, and also at the local Hudson's Bay Company store. Especially prized were fabric and dressmaking materials that were brought up or mailed by visitors from the south. These could not be found on the shelves of the Hudson Bay Company store. The pattern of the skirt Kerouac made suggests that this is the end result of one of those gifts. Below the skirt are her sealskin boots, which she also made. Quote, my mother, Alma Houston, when we were in the South, would find some interesting kinds of material and take 3 or 4 meters of it and wrap it up and send it maybe to Kerouac or to some other Inuk woman in the community, and they would appreciate that beyond all measure, recalled John. In the photo, Kerouac has got a bit of material there that she would have certainly sewn up herself, and it's probably a bit of material pattern that's now not necessarily duplicated in the town. Quote, there is no word for art in Inuktitut, Kerouac once said. Quote, we say it is to transfer something from the real to the unreal. I am an owl. I am a happy owl. I like to make people happy and everything happy. I am the light of happiness and I am a dancing owl. In Ian's photograph, she is light emerging from day. And we can just let the slides go ahead a bit, Sean. And I'll just give you a little stop when we get to it. Let's see it here. Where is it? There, one back. Sorry, Sean. One more back. Right there. Okay, this photo we see, and I'm not going to read this because I can ad-lib it, I think, is Oliver Rupert. He's the one holding the stick with some of his friends. It was taken by photographer George LaGrady, who spent some time up in Eastern James Bay in 1973. And this is in Fort George. Oliver Rupert was a founding member of the Fort George Rockers, which was a rock band based in Fort George, but that toured all of Eastern James Bay, all the Creek communities around there. And in the summer of '74, they undertook, which is probably the only rock and roll tour done 100% by canoe. Because it was summer, the easiest way to get to the communities was to go up and down James Bay in their canoes. So at the time, they put up their 25 horsepower motors, loaded their amps, their guitars, their drum kit, generator, because they relied on generators for electricity to power their guitars and stuff, and mics. And they began their 4-city tour, I should say 4 community tour of James Bay in their canoes. And I'll start here. We had 3 canoes and we hired about 12 people to work with us. At that time, we didn't have that much equipment. It was just mostly amplifiers, guitars, and drums. We made it to Emoji that first day in the evening. As we were supposed to play that evening, one of the guys had to clean his guitar because it got wet on the journey. We set up our amplifiers while he cleaned his guitar, and by the time we finished setting up, it was getting close to showtime. He came on with his guitar, was going to try it, and he still had his hip waders on. He plugged in his guitar, and luckily it worked, and he started playing. I think he was the only guy in rock history who ever played with hip waders on stage. Shortly after the concert, the Fort George Rockers left the next morning. But while they were in the middle of the bay, the winds picked up and the water became too choppy for the 3 canoes. Quote, we couldn't make it any further, so we had to sleep halfway to the next community. So we slept out in the bush on an island. We put up a temporary little teepee. Some of us got some sleep and some didn't. We were sitting on the shoreline of the little bay when we saw a beluga whale swimming by. One of the guys wanted to shoot it, but we said not to shoot it. We had one woman who came with her boyfriend. She was pregnant, so we told him not to shoot the whale because it might wake and scare her. The next morning, the winds calmed, and they were able to travel to the next community, which was Eastmain, Quebec, where there was a wedding that evening, and one of the band members was the best man. After the wedding, they played to an appreciative crowd. We left that morning, but before we got to the bay, one of our motors broke down at 20 horsepower. So one canoe was left in the community to see if we could borrow another motor. After 2 hours, they came back with a motor which was at 25 horsepower and faster than the other ones we had. But once again, the winds and waves picked up, forcing the 3 canoes to again make for shore and safety. That night, the band and entourage camped out in the bush, but this time they were plagued by hundreds of mice, which they had to chase away. The next morning, the bay was calmer and the tour resumed in time for the Fort George Rockers to play their last gig in Waskaganish. And so that's the story of the Fort George Rockers on their 1974, I was going to say World Tour, I should say James Bay Tour. And I'm proud to say Oliver Rupert, who is now in his late 60s, is still a guitarist and leader of the Fort George Rockers, and they're still playing on. So they are not just a band that finds ways to get around, but a very durable band. And thanks, Sean. We can just go ahead with the slides a bit. And we'll come to a woman with a canoe. One more. I think there's a color photo of her with that one right there. Let's stop there. One of the photographers I interviewed was John McPhee. He was in his early 90s when I interviewed him. And like many of the photographers in Blanket Toss under Midnight Sun, he was an amateur photographer. And he happened to be stationed, he worked for what was soon became the Department of Natural Resources, but he worked up there. He spoke Cree, he knew people in the community, and he always had his camera with him. And he was up in the northwestern Ontario in the late 1940s up to the early 1960s. So it's very much a time of change. People were still using dog teams to get around. People were still living off the land. The whole thing of bringing people into towns, communities on the reserves was just in process. So people were still scattered, still living off the land. And while John McPhee was up there, he heard about this woman who still lived off the land and only came into town once in a while. So this is her story, and that's her in the photo. In 1949, while working at Oystryk House, originally the site of a trading post on Lake St. Joseph, John McPhee, photographer and field worker with the Ontario Department of Land and Resources, heard of a woman who reportedly lived an old-style traditional lifestyle. He was told this woman of the land would come to Osnaburg only once a month to pick up her old age security benefit and sundry supplies at the local Hudson's Bay Company store. At the time in Osnaburg, as in many northern villages, the Hudson's Bay Company store was a place to buy goods and also served as the local post office and the place to contact a doctor if you needed via radio. Intrigued by the story of this woman, John McPhee went to Lake St. Joseph to meet her on one of her trips into town. In the photographs he took that day, he took both color slides and black and white. She is seen arriving with her grandson and also paddling up and down the shoreline. Her name, McPhee found out, was Marie Mickenek. Mickenek spoke no English, and McPhee only spoke English and a few words in Cree, so they communicated mostly through body gestures and sign language. Marie Mickenek was Anishinaabe and lived largely on rabbits, fish, berries, and manoomin, wild rice, when it could be obtained. When he met her, Mickenek was probably in her late 60s. Her canoe was made of birch bark, well crafted and sturdy, and her paddle she had also handmade, likely carved from spruce. Quote, at that time, few people were making canoes anymore out of birch bark, McPhee told me. They were mostly all replaced by commercial canoes. Chestnut canoes, which the Hudson's Bay Company handled and sold, made in New Brunswick. Mickenek's canoe was entirely of her own making, with patchwork and repairs added from time to time. Quote, I noticed one spot where she had repaired a tear with a wire nail or two and some cotton twine, he said. McPhee moved to another part of Ontario soon after and never saw or heard of Marie Mickenek again. Presumably, she went on living off the land, harvesting, snaring, fishing, or hunting the food she needed, and using her skills, making and repairing what she had built from the resources offered by the land. Thanks, Sean, and we can just let the slide go again. And we'll come to a photo of a young teenager holding a purse. It should be in there somewhere. That one right there. We can stop there. And I'll read this part here. This is a fairly extraordinary story, I think, that Rose while I was riding blanket toss under midnight sun. The woman holding the purse her name is Emma Alfred. And we're in the Yukon now. In 1951, anthropologist Catherine McClellan, known simply as Katie to many of the locals, took the photo of then 14-year-old Emma Alfred holding a beaverfoot purse that her mother had just made for her. As Marie Blaghika, who was also a young girl at the time, recalled, quote, "We saw Katie and Julie around a lot, but didn't think of anything of it. We were kids." Both anthropologists, along with Douglas Leachman, were recording legends, histories, and other stories from the oral cultures of the Tlingit and Northern Shoshone people. The land around Pelly Crossing has a deep history. Halfway between Whitehorse and Dawson City, it had long been a trading post where Northern Shoshone and coastal Tlingit would meet and trade, as well as set up fishing camps in the summer. The Hudson Bay Company built a trading post there, Fort Selkirk, and many of the Shoshone people settled in the area while continuing to trap, hunt, fish, and gather in the traditional hunting areas. This area was an active place of trade long before the Klondike Gold Rush of 1896 to 1899. Emma Alfred remembers helping her mother sew the beaverfoot purse. It had distinctive beaver claws on the front and the word Yukon sewn on the sides. The purse was newly finished the day Catherine McClellan took the photograph outside the family tent. Quote, "I had just come out of swimming, and then my mom told me to hold the purse so that the photo could be taken," Alfred recalled. So there was the proof right there that was my mom's purse. After that, a few years later, the purse disappeared. Alfred knew that it had been sold, but there was no record of who the buyer was or where the purse had ended up. Alfred assumed she would never see it again and that it was in someone's personal collection or a museum or was simply lost and anywhere in the world. Emma Alfred was employed as a support worker for the Selkirk First Nation, and she was among a delegation of elders from the Yukon who visited the Canadian Museum of History in Ottawa in 2015, funded by the Yukon Community Development Fund. They were there to identify artifacts from the region and possibly begin the act of repatriation that would one day bring some of the objects home to be displayed within their nations. As well, they listened to audio recordings from the late 1940s and early 1950s that had been gathered by McClellan, Cruikshank, and Leachman, the anthropologists. For many of the elders on that trip, it would be a poignant experience hearing their parents' or grandparents' voices speaking in their own language for the first time in decades. They looked through moccasins, jackets, different beadwork, etc. But there was one surprise for Alfred on that trip. As the elders were shown the artifacts from the region, she saw, for the first time in over 60 years, that very purse that her mother had given her and that her mother had made for her. Quote, "It was quite the thing to see," she recalled. Alfred immediately hoped that someday that purse will be returning to Pelly Crossing. And it's almost 7:30, so thank you for listening to the reading, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with Les. So let's start.
Yes, very good. Good evening, Paul. That was some beautiful passages from your book, and I just want to give you a warm personal welcome here tonight, Paul, on this occasion.
Unless I'm supposed to introduce you.
Oh,
I was on mute and I was trying to introduce you.
Okay, well, okay.
So Les Oystryk is a retired conservation officer and lives in Creighton, Saskatchewan. He retired in 2010 after a 36-plus year career with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment as a conservation officer and compliance manager. Les's career took him to many postings across northern Saskatchewan with a variety of district, park, and area responsibilities that revolved around resource and environmental conservation, protection, and management, with a strong emphasis on First Nations and community stakeholder consultations. Les has a keen interest and love for the northern part of Saskatchewan. as that is where he has lived and worked for the majority of his life. He has a passion for the history of the North, particularly with respect to the people that have been involved with the fish and fur trade. Carrying out Northern historical research is one of Les's personal passions. A rich Northern heritage and culture is a huge piece of the traditional fabric of the Churchill River region. And now, Les Oystryk.
Well, thank you, Sean. Absolutely. It's just a real pleasure to be here tonight. And again, it's just such an awesome opportunity. I've been looking forward to this for quite a long time. And I don't think I even realized how long after discovering your wonderful media posts there, Paul, and having seen them a few years ago, I think probably around 2017, I became really taken with you and with your project, for so many reasons there. But I don't think I ever thought that I would have an opportunity like this to actually have a conversation and with you and with so many other people here tonight from all over Saskatchewan, and I see some people from Manitoba as well. So this is just such a pleasure here, and congratulations on the publication of your book, Paul. It's just extremely heartwarming to see so many images portrayed in so many different descriptions and so on. I've written down a few things that I think we can talk about, but some words that I kept as I read the book and tried to really understand, a lot of the things that you were portraying. Words like dignity of people, strength, resilience, humor, the smiling faces on those those 9 little kids in that one panoramic photo is just it just says so much. It's definitely a fascinating project and a book that's it's a remarkable collection which illustrates everyday life in eight of our Indigenous communities across Canada. And I sure want to extend that, and I hope if people, I know Sean had mentioned earlier that if anybody has any questions along the way, please put them into the chat box, and we'll have some time at the end there to try and answer questions there as well. So we're going to try and make this interesting and informative. And I guess one of the things I wondered about, Paul, was you had mentioned to sometimes you expect the unexpected, and I was wondering what some of the most unexpected revelations that you maybe discovered as you went down this journey of sharing photographs. What sort of surprises did you have?
Oh, thanks, Les, and that's a good question. I began doing this. It's almost 5 years now, so it's been a while. And it originally, I wanted to just frame the experience, as you said, the positive experience of Indigenous communities through the hardest of times. Because if the people we see in these photographs had not been the people they were, had not been full of humor and, as you said, dignity and overall good people, we would not have the languages and the culture and stuff that we have today. Because we have to remember a lot of this was happening during the time of the Indian Act and residential schools and forced relocations, all those things. So I wanted to kind of switch that lens around and get a framing of the positive experiences of Indigenous communities through that, as we know, through hard times, and to show respect for previous generations, our ancestors, etc. What surprised me most less, I think, was as I began to post these on social media, and this is the funny thing about the project, is I'm dealing with old photographs that are primarily from museums or archives or historical societies, and they're part of collections. And I would not be able to access these photos if it wasn't for the internet. And in fact, these photos have been digitized. So we get this new technology on old objects. At the same time, I'm posting them on social media, which I could not have done like 10, over a decade ago. It would not exist. So it's kind of taking these photos from collections, posting them on social media, and then having from that, this whole unexpected experience arose where people would say, that's my auntie, that's my uncle, that's me 40 years ago. And then this narrative would unfold with many of the photos where suddenly we had a story developed that actually brought the photos back to life. It brought them back to the context. And in many cases, the photos that I was posting had not been seen by many people, by people from whose families they were. So it wasn't just the naming of the photos, or it was also kind of reclaiming those photos for the communities themselves. So for me, what was the most surprising was how this oral narrative developed and how the exchange and the interaction between the photograph and the people who are identifying and telling the stories. And that really, for me, brought the images to life.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, and it's what sometimes I think is amazing, with what you've done is that, social media can be such an instant flash in the pan. People are I think there's general feeling that a lot of times people think that what's on Facebook, for example, is just here today, gone tomorrow. And yet you've taken those images and you've taken a deeper dive, as I would call it, and you've been able to draw out those stories and those details that I think are absolutely fascinating. When I think about the term, and Sean and I were talking earlier there, the old saying about a picture's worth 1,000 words, and a lot of times we don't, we say that, but we don't really mean it, but in so many cases with the photos that you've taken, they've taken on a life of their own, and the stories, so on. How did you do your follow-up research? Because so many of these would have started with a name or a location.
That's again another good question, Les. What I had to do for the book, for Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun, was really focus on those photographs that had prompted the most response from people, where I felt that I could actually make phone calls, send emails, get in touch with people, and start to actually get deeper, as you said, dive deeper into the story behind the photo. Because the project has involved literally hundreds of photos, it was necessary to just kind of to make the book actually manageable and, something that people would be able to afford, as well as something I'd be able to do, to focus on just kind of 8 communities or 8 regions. And that was a decision made right from the beginning, because otherwise it would just be too grand or too big a project. And from there, what I did was start the process of calling people. A lot of the people I interviewed for Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun were now in their anywhere from their 60s up to their 90s. So I did this book over 3 years ago. I started writing it, and collecting these stories, I felt the timing was really fortunate on my part, because a lot of the people quite a few people who I interviewed for the book have since passed on. So it was just fortuitous that I was able to talk to people at that time when they're still around and their memories were still sharp. So it was gathering the stories that way. And I also learned gathering the stories that to be patient. For example, I was trying to get stories up, some follow up on the James Bay area. and I was calling in spring. And in spring up in James Bay, it was goose hunting season. So everyone was out. The kids were back from school. Everyone was on the land hunting geese. So I just, learned quickly that if I make a phone call or send an email, to not expect a response within, a day or two. And occasionally I would kind of, okay, this story is not going to happen. And then 3 months later, I'd get a phone call from an elder saying, did you call back in June? Yeah, I did. And then the story would happen. So it also took a bit longer, but it was worth it in that way. And I quickly learned that my sense of time and their sense of time were different. And I had to adjust to that as a researcher, as someone writing the book.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. That's a very, very interesting perspective for sure on dealing with people in particularly such remote communities as you did. I think in some ways, I've reflected on it, and I think you've changed, you and the writing that you've done. You've changed the narrative about how we as Canadians view and appreciate the circumstances of life that so many Indigenous people were living. And I was wondering if I could get your thoughts on how that narrative is changing and how your book is contributing to that change.
Gladly, Les. The first thing was the photographers. I really wanted to focus on those photographers who had some sort of relationship with people in these communities. That was very important to not just to me, but also to the photographs themselves. We all know that the moment that a stranger is pointing a camera at you, it feels intrusive, like who is that person? What's this about? So it was important for me to find those photographers who had some sort of relationship and were known in those communities, whether they were there in whatever capacity they were there at, that they were actually known, because the fact that they were accepted allowed them to have family photos, allowed them to take photos of children playing, allowed them to take photos of people hunting or people at dances, people playing music at gatherings, etc. Photographs of elders in particular. If the person is uncomfortable with that scenario, that photograph is going to show that. So it's important for me to locate those photos and curate those photos where there was that intimacy was welcome, where there was clearly a rapport between the camera and the person who was being photographed. So that was the first stipulation. The second was to show those photographs of just day-to-day life. I wasn't looking for, who were the leaders in that community. I wasn't looking for who were the chiefs or who were the politicians or who was doing this or that. I really wanted the photographs to show day-to-day life. So in that story, say, of Marie Mickonack that I read earlier, no one would know about her if John McPhee hadn't told me about her, because she's not in any other book. She was just a woman of the land who came into town once in a blue moon to pick up her pension. But for me, that was an interesting story. And it was those kind of stories that I really kind of wanted to get as part of the book. Is the stories that are not in the history books, stories that people may not know about, but stories that are, and people who are recognized within those communities. So it was saying, here's your story, here's your photograph, and here's the whole narrative that goes along with it. So that was basically how it came together, Les.
Sort of the rest of the story in a much better format.
It was a very, I would like to think if I can say a word, I think organic. I was trying to do it in an organic way, which is letting the people tell the story of the photograph and quoting them as much as possible, because it's their story. They're the ones who live in these communities. They're the ones who have a relationship to the people in these photographs. And in many cases now, they're the ones who these photographs have been sent to the communities, are now held by members of the family. So it was kind of this whole 360 full circle kind of thing that happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. If I didn't mention at the beginning, I will now that so many of your photographs that you chose and the stories or the narratives that you woven together really rang a lot of bells in my head, and I think they have with other people who've already read your book or who are yet to read your book. But there are so many things. One piece that really jumped out at me here was there was a photograph of William Moore, who was a Cree man in Ontario, making birch bark art by doing birch bark bitings, and it was really good to see that, and it was also noted that he was one of the very few people, along with Angelique Morasti from our home community here on Beaver Lake, and the photographer that was John McPhee, I believe, and you know he photographed Marie as well in a homemade birch bark canoe. So I'm just wondering whether you saw in those communities that he spent time in and the people he spent time in that really perfected those things with birch bark.
No, that's a really one of those things that I was glad we were able to get a record. And you correctly point out William Moore doing the birch bark biting. And if people aren't familiar with birch bark biting, it almost, I would say that, it's been revived. It was almost dying out. And around the time that these photographs were taken, it was, just a few, like you said, Angelique Morasti up in the area, Nick of the Woods, William Moore, a few other people were doing it. I'm glad to say now that people worked on, reviving this art. It's birch bark biting is an amazing, for me, it's an amazing art because it's done. It's not drawn. It's done with your teeth. It's, you learn how to make the patterns by folding, and it kind of blows my mind actually that people can make. You look at it and you see these bees, or you see these butterflies, or these birds, or how do people bite and make these images? And that for me was one of the things I really wanted to catch, was the skill of that art form. And I'm hoping that if future generations of birch bark biters, that these photos of Angelique Morasti or William Moore, that they will look back at that as inspiration to carry these forms forward and to keep them alive. So it's a really important connection for me.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Thank you for that. And that was just so heartwarming to see that, and it was just such a wonderful connection to that art form here in especially in northern Saskatchewan. And there were some things that I also thought about in terms of some difficulties that people went through, and I read the portion dealing with the very sad story about the dog slaughter that the government of Canada orchestrated up in Nunavik. And what were your feelings about that when you were talking to people and the experiences that people were sharing with you?
I was, of course, deeply saddened by, as I read more about that, and the people may not know, as you said, the orchestrated culling or killing of all of the Huskies, and in the 50s and stuff in the north, and recognizing that was part of a plan to force, and people were forcibly relocated. Part of the government's policy with terms of Canadian sovereignty was to force people to move way up north, where they had never lived,
relocating,
just to assert that this is now part of Canada, right? So this whole just moving people around like chess pieces without respect, and for and doing things like the culling of the dogs, etc., changing, just how people, that subsistence and hunting and gathering lifestyle, and forcibly trying to eradicate that. It made me really appreciate the hardships that people had went through, but also it made me really appreciate their strength, that people did not give up,
And they came back.
and they came back. And there, and later on there's apologies. We're sorry for the killing of the dogs, etc. These things happened, but the most important thing for me was how people just did not give up. I mean, that's not to say that there weren't a lot of hardships and personal sad stories that happened out of that period, but there were people who got through it, and it's that dignity of culture, language, relationship to the land, all those things that I hope the book portrays in terms of these communities, and particularly for people who I think have never. Canada, as we know, is an immense country, and very few of us get to travel from coast to coast to coast and experience the difference. And I wanted the book also to show that. The difference in the communities of lifestyle, of language, of how people live, so that people could appreciate not just that relationship that people have with each other, with their kinship and the land, but also how diverse it is, whether it's in Nunavut or whether it's on the prairies or whether it's in the Northwest Territories. Just that expanse, because so many of us and so many of the readers of this book probably live within 100 kilometers of the American border and live in, Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver or Calgary, and have never really see the wilderness as being a place maybe you go skiing or you take the family camping, but it's a park. It's not a lived relationship. And I really wanted the book to show that lived relationship.
Yeah. I guess maybe a follow-up question. I mean, your title, Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun, it was just so interesting to me for sure. And I'm sure other people, how did you choose that title?
I did not choose it at all, Les, which is kind of funny. I had different titles, most of them probably not very good in my mind at the time, but it was Denise Bukowski, who's my agent, who handles all the business side of things. She came up with the title Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun because of one photo which showed a woman being tossed up off the blanket, and she's framed by the midnight sun. As you know, up north the sun is up, doesn't dip below the horizon. I don't know if I can be shown on the Les, Sean, can I be shown for a second? Are you able to switch to me? I'm not sure Sean can do that, but at the back of the book there's a photo of a woman being tossed up to the sun, and she's just up in the air at the height of the blanket toss, and you can see this midnight sun kind of behind her, just framing her. And to me, it just captured the positivity of the book and of the message of the book, and the intergenerational strength in carrying on of not just tradition but adaptability. And I think that's really important, that we don't see these communities as being just quote unquote tradition, that they're adaptable. They've always been adaptable. They're always changing. And then there's this idea in the South, I think, that, okay, they have snowmobiles now, they're no longer traditional, or they have this, they're no longer traditional. And that's never been the way it is, as we know. It's always been about adaptation. And to me, that's also an important lesson in the book.
Yes, boy. Well, and that photograph, actually, yes, when I saw the photograph as well, I just thought that the photo just has so much energy in it. There's people are really putting their effort into that. There's a lot of people hanging onto that blanket, and the skill the skill of that person flying through the air and coming back down. There's probably a whole pile of laughter going on, and so much energy there. It was just quite amazing. one of the other questions, I guess, and you rang a lot of bells, and James Jerome, who was one of the indigenous photographers that you featured, and he had a photo of a young Julianne and Andre cutting fish, and it was just wonderful to see. After having lived and worked in that part of the Arctic, I really associated with his work, and I was hoping you could share some stories and some recollections about James Jerome and his legacy.
Thanks, Les. Yeah, James was a Gwich'in photographer, self-taught, essentially 95% self-taught photographer. He did take some lessons down in Toronto. He sadly passed at an early age in a house fire. He passed in 1978 at the age of 30. And what he left was a legacy of hundreds of photographs that he had taken of Dene and Gwich'in and Inuit life in the Northwest Territories. Primarily when he was working for the Native Press. He was one of the principal photographers there. Just a great guy. He went to fishing camps. He lived off the land. He also was at things like the Arctic Games in Nunavik and things like that. So he had both the living off the land photos as well as urban photos. So because he was a member of the community and well known, I think what he represented for me and why it was important to have him in the book is he's an example of an Indigenous self-taught photographer who left us a really important collection of photographs that fortunately after the house fire, the majority of them were salvaged and were acquired by the archives of the Northwest Territories and are now there for future generations to appreciate. And James Jerome was also working on he had planned to work on a book, which he never was able to do, obviously, but based on his photographs and Gwich'in life and Dene life in the 70s during this time of change and stuff. So I really felt it was important to include him in the book.
Yeah, excellent. Well, it sure was very inspiring to see those photos that he had, and knowing that he had taken a lot more than that. But do you have a concept, I guess, in terms of how people across Canada are learning to or getting to learn to how to appreciate life in a different time period, through your work?
I hope so. I hope people can appreciate what's in the photos. That there's people laughing, there's people living off the land, there's people at dances, there's people hunting, there's all these things, people making things, etc. That people can appreciate how things were. But what's important to me is also that these photos are not just artifacts of the past, that as we talked about earlier, through technology now and through social media, these photographs take on a new life. We're able to share them with people in the communities. People in the communities are able to take ownership of them. They're no longer just parts of collections that are in museums or archives. They now belong to the people. And that, for me, was the most important thing in Blanket Toss under Midnight Sun, to see that happen. And I think that's what makes me the happiest.
Yeah. And are you finding other people who've come forward? I take it a lot of the photographs were certainly from, archival collections and sort of organized formal things. But have you had people coming to you with other collections?
Yes, I have, Les. What's happened lately is people private collections have started to began about a year and a half ago, began approaching me. There was a family whose father had been a doctor up north and an amateur photographer, and his photographs had been in a box under a bed for, until he passed. And that family really wanted those photos to get back to the community. So I was able to, they sent them to me. I posted a few of them, and they were identified almost within an hour or two of being posted. Yeah. And then the family of the man who'd taken the photos then ensured that high resolution prints of those photos were sent to the families. So those kind of initiatives have begun to happen, and to me, that's very rewarding.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Wow, that's good to hear. That's very reassuring that people are really respectful, and they want to share with not only yourself, but obviously you're able to do that over social media, which again has such a powerful presence. I can only imagine how far across Canada or the North America that your followers come from, and that's the wonderful part of social media. Your photos have I was really impressed with the photo credits section at the back of the book, Paul. I don't think I've ever seen a book that's got such a substantial professional photo credit. How did you arrive at why was that important? You did it.
It was important. Firstly, I've always felt it's important to give accreditation to the photographers, and to provide the information where the photo was coming from. So it was really important for me, and thank you for noticing that, to have that at the back of the book. It's also, I think, where this project will go next is to have a kind of database where family members, researchers, students can go to a website, key in, say, the name of L'Orange, for instance, and come up with a bunch of links of where there are historical photos of L'Orange, whether it's Saskatchewan Archives, Library and Archives in Ottawa, whether it's private collections, but there would be a database for people to do their research, or people to find these photos. And that's kind of the next stage, is to make it available to everyone in one spot, so they can go to that spot and then go to wherever they need to go after that. So that's the next thing. That's kind of kind of grows out of this idea of giving accreditation that's at the back of the book.
Yeah, well, you certainly sparked the interest, and I think your message to me, if I had a message from that section, is that these are so worth sharing, and people can really appreciate that when they know that it comes from a family or otherwise. And thank you very much. Did you have some emotional times? Was there anything that really got you emotionally when you had some of your experiences with the people and the photographs or the stories, Paul?
I think like when I told the Emma Alfred story, photos like that, that kind of come full circle. Yeah, it made me appreciate that the project can in some way contribute to happy endings, if you will, or to people seeing their relatives and for the first time. Those are always emotional things, when someone sees a photo they've never seen before of their grandmother, their grandfather, their auntie, their uncle. So it's those kind of things, that recognition, that is the most rewarding for me. So yes, I felt that a lot, so much that it became almost the norm for the project. I would say out of 3/4 of the photos that have been posted as part of the project have been in some way identified or placed, or a story come out of them. So it's really been a pretty good batting average, if you will. for this project.
Must be tremendously satisfying. You bet.
It is.
Well,
it is.
well, we've certainly talked. Does anybody? I don't see any questions in the chat box. So if anybody has any questions, we have some time. Just looking at my clock here, but we can try and accommodate that. And if anybody has anything they'd like to ask Paul, or
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. That's right. Yeah.
Just taken off mute for a moment. I'm not sure about
Yes.
others, but mine says the chat is disabled. I can't actually type in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Okay, so we will go by hand raising then.
Okay. All right. Well, let's check out the hand raising here. For those that are on video, that will work as well. So
We have
Michelle and Bill, or were you raising your hand?
there's James and Trudy who are raising their hand right now.
Okay. Maybe go ahead with James and Trudy.
Okay, my question for Paul is, I'm wondering if your T-shirt, I just see the top half and it looks like a midnight sun. Is it? Does it represent blanket toss under the midnight sun by any chance?
Oh no! It's just a red Rolling Stones T-shirt that I happen to have, and it was warm in here, so I took off. I had a kind of sweater over top of it, so no connection to the book.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you for asking.
All right. And did I see Michelle with her hand up? You're on mute, Michelle.
I have a question for you, Les. Are you going to have Paul inspire you to put a collection of photographs out on Reindeer Lake?
Well, that's an excellent question, and the thought has crossed my mind. I won't kid you. Paul's work has been extremely inspiring. To be able to have the reach and the support of so many people, and boy, he sure led the example. I'll tell you, yeah, absolutely. We are enjoying our Reindeer Lake history. I know.
Oh, I enjoy it all the time, but now I have to try and find. I hadn't heard of Paul's book before, and I will have to try and find it now. I suspect, can we just order it on Amazon, or do we order it from the University of Saskatchewan?
No,
or
it's available everywhere. So Amazon, chapters online, which whoever you deal with, they'll have it.
Okay, well, thank you. I have so enjoyed your talk and your I know the emotional connection to the people in the photographs has really, really touched me. I really respect that very, very much. It's wonderful to see.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Takes you back to Brochet, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Which I need to. I know I need to get back to. However.
Well, these things promote that idea. Absolutely.
Yes,
and
it certainly does.
Paul's done a lot to do that. Thank you.
Betty, Ann, and Stuart have a question.
Yeah, Paul, I was just intrigued by the photo of the two women digging the holes. And what was that all about? I'm wondering if you can clue me in.
Oh, gladly, and a good question. The two women digging the holes were actually gathering up clay, and it was taken at near Duck Lake on Beardy's Okomesis Reserve, which happens to be my mom's home reserve. And it was taken by a gentleman named Everett Baker, who was a Saskatchewan photographer who worked for the wheat I think it was the wheat pool or wheat board, whatever it was at the time. And he traveled the province taking photos, not just of reserves, but of all communities in the 40s and 50s. And he took this photo of the two women digging the clay. And the clay was used, at the time, all the houses on the reserve were log houses. So you'd use the clay to kind of, it'd be mixed with grass and used to chink the between the logs as kind of insulation. And also it'd be used on the outside as when you kind of painted the exterior of the houses. So that's what they're doing, is gathering the clay, which they would later mix up with some grass and stuff, and to be used in the interior to fill the gaps or any holes within the log houses themselves. And I imagine that practice probably stopped shortly after that photo was taken, but at that time, 30s, 40s, and it wouldn't just be on reserves. Also, I think old farmhouses would have that kind of thing as well. So that it was not an uncommon practice in Saskatchewan at that time to gather clay.
Okay, thank you. I just
Oh, you're welcome.
was really struck by the small size of the pail and that great big wagon, and how much time it must have taken to fill that wagon.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. You're on mute, John.
Yes, we have a question from Sasha.
Hi, Paul. I really appreciated the evening here, but I had two small questions, I guess. One, I have read a little bit about your Books to Prisoners initiative, where somebody can choose to purchase a book and have that sent to someone who is currently incarcerated. And I think that's an amazing program. I guess the question is, have you, I guess, made some connections with folks after, or heard, anything of an impact that's made right now for people?
Thank you for that question. And yes, about a year and a half ago, I began to, I had a contact with Books to Prisoners, which is located out of Ottawa. And what people would do was they could buy a copy of Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun through my website and in the name and have it sent to someone who was incarcerated. And the reason I did that was I really feel books are not just knowledge, but they're also healing. And if they can help someone on their recovery, from hard times, all the better. And because, a good percentage of, a disproportionate percentage of inmates, particularly in the province of Saskatchewan, are Indigenous background, I really wanted to see that happen. So I began that process with Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun. I haven't heard back from anyone who, is incarcerated and has got the book, but I do know that it's gone to libraries, prison libraries. It's gone to individual people in different institutions, and that's just, that's not just adult institutions, but also for juveniles or youth. So for me, it just feels like a really important project. And I really appreciate you noticing that. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I feel really strongly that just what you said, that a book can be healing as well. And so, I'm really happy to see that that's what you're doing for sure. And just another small question is, I'm one of the Manitoba folks here, but have you thought about doing something similar in another province? I'm from Saskatchewan originally, but I'm, Sue, I'm sure you've had that question before.
Oh, no, it's a very good question. And yes, I hope in the future to do something along the lines of Blanket Toss, maybe in a different way. But, there were so many areas that there was nothing from Manitoba, there was nothing right on BC or the Maritimes. So there's so many areas that the book did not cover at all. So it's a really good question. And yes, I would like to, I'm not sure what yet, but I'd like to see something more happen with it.
Something will come up.
Yeah.
Something will come up.
Thank you.
And Hillary has a question.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Hillary.
I just lost my headphone.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I follow you on Twitter, and we share a birthday actually. So.
Oh my goodness.
I noticed that, I think on Twitter, that your book was being translated into German. And I'm kind of wondering about the German reception, if you've had any feedback to your book, just kind of through my own research and museum studies and photo history and just seeing documentaries on CBC, like the German fascination with Indigenous North America is not necessarily a fascination with the actual social reality. And I'm just wondering, have you had any feedback if your book has been well received in Germany, that it might be kind of a non-traditional book that Germans are seeing and maybe seeing kind of a new reality of changing their understanding?
I've heard good things. Thank you for that question, by the way. I've heard good things. It's fairly recent. It only came out about 4 months ago, I think, 5 months ago. So it was just this fall. It is through a big publishing house. It's kind of the equivalent of Random House in Germany, BTB. And it's a bigger, it's Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun, but it's actually a bigger, they did it in a larger size, which is kind of nice, very nice. I don't read German, but I know the translator was a good translator who must have spent months. Like some of the stories, it's hard for me to think what words would be the equivalent in German, because German is a different language entirely. But I've heard from the publisher and from people's response, I've heard good things about the book. And yes, you're right. I hope it shows people in Germany a realistic portrayal of these communities. And also it is featured in the upcoming, because of the pandemic, it was delayed, but this fall it's featured as part of the Canada's a featured country at the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is a huge book fair in October, this coming October. And Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun is one of the books that's being featured there. So I'm looking forward to that and hoping it has a really good reception at that festival. So thank you for that.
Yeah, awesome. Good to hear. You bet. Excellent.
Rick has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Rick Crable. I'm down in hi, Les. Haven't seen you for a while. And thanks very much, Paul. Yeah. I'm down in the southeast corner of the province here in Treaty 4 country. And we just had a book released not long ago, An Honest, Genial, and Kindly People by a local historian named Adrian Payton. And he did much the same thing. He went into the history of some of the First Nations photographs from the southeast here. And his experience was very much the same, Paul. People found grandfathers and ancestors that they had no record of. So my message is, we sure hope you do a sequel here. These books are capturing history that will be lost very, very quickly. And you guys are putting together some well, not Adrian anymore. He's passed away very recently, but putting these books together while at this time enables people to recover some of that history that'll be gone in a few years. So we sure hope you do a sequel. So.
Thank you for raising that, and thank you for mentioning Adrian Payton's work. I know of him through the Saskatchewan History and Folklore Society, which has a big part of his collection. And I encourage people, if they're interested in Adrian Payton's photos, to also go to the Saskatchewan History and Folklore Society website, because they've digitized and archived a lot of the photos that were in his collection. I think that's really, as you say, it's an important part of our history.
Yeah, they also hold Everett Baker's collection that you mentioned with the clay there. So a lot of First Nation stuff there too.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Question.
Oh, we have Dan McGill.
Dan McGill. So I'm from southern Saskatchewan. So a lot of this is fairly new to me, and I must say hi to not only Les but Rick and Sasha. Paul, my question to you is, I'm just looking online at the different books that you've had published. Of those books that you've put together already, which one is your favorite, and why?
My favorite would be Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun, because of the impact it's had. Not just, I'm not talking about sales or stuff like that. I'm talking about impact with people. The response it's gotten from people. That's really rewarding. A lot of the other books I had done previously were either fiction or part of short story collections. And I've kind of moved away from that. I'm very much more interested in photography and nonfiction stuff now. So Blanket Toss Under Midnight Sun, I feel, is really close to my heart. And it is definitely the book that, so until the next one, is, I think has resonated with a lot of people. So for me, that's always rewarding when you've put something out there that people appreciate or respond to. So that's why I would put it number one.
Okay, good. Thank you. I must say, it was the one that got my attention. I'm not sure it's because of how it was talked about during the session tonight, but it got my attention right off the bat. It looks very interesting. So I'm going to start with that one. I'm looking forward to.
That's the one. I appreciate that so much. And thank you for the interest.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
I do not see any other hand. Oh, we have Dorothy Bird.
Just a question regarding all this photography and old pictures, particularly old slides. Any convenient way to transpose those from slides to something's digital that doesn't cost an arm and a leg?
Oh, good question. I think with the technology now, it's easier to scan and digitize photos than it was previously. So it's more accessible than it was in the past. I mean, to do it properly, you still need a good scanner, and that's going to be a few $100s. So it's not, I don't want to make it sound like it's cheap, but it is becoming more, I think the technology is becoming more accessible for people. So I'm hoping that we'll see more people on their own being able to do that. And we won't just have to rely on museums or archives or institutions who have, the money to do it. And the problem with museums and archives is they only acquire certain collections, right? They're not there to say my grandfather is a photographer. They're not going to buy his photos and digitize them. So I have to find a way to do that. So I'm hoping the technology will become even more accessible for people so that they're able to do that. Because part of this, as we talked earlier with Les's work and stuff, is to make this so that it can happen in communities on their own, and communities can kind of build their own resource of old photographs. And that's what I would like to see happen.
Well, I'm interested in this too, because my community is asking, well, you were on our community in the 60s and 70s and so on. You must have pictures. And I do, but they're slides.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I can, we've done a fair bit of slide conversion. I just say that on behalf of the Northern Gateway Museum here at Denier Beach and other reasons as well. But I could connect with you, Dorothy, and there's certainly help available for that, and is very reasonable as well. So, but you bring up such a good point, because it is my firm belief that there are hundreds of homes with basements full of photo albums and slide carousels that are becoming more and more and more priceless as the days go by, and
almost useless.
We need to rescue that, and we need to make it available, because boy, there's a collection of photographs that were taken here in the early 70s, Noah and Emma Custer, and those photographs are all sitting in the archives in Ottawa, and nobody even knows that they're there, let alone appreciate them. So anytime you can bring out the photos is a good day.
Well, thanks,
Thank
Len.
you.
You have my address and email, so
I will give you an email. You betcha. Thank you.
thank you.
That's a wonderful answer. Thanks, Les.
It looks like Sasha has another question.
I do. Just a really small comment on that. Myself, I do a bit of digitizing, but I had a lady the other day that actually brought some slides to me. And you guys aren't going to believe this, but they were actually slides that were clearly, I guess, photos taken of photos from the Assiniboine River, from Pine River in Manitoba in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
So these, I just to what you said, there are collections in basements, and it's just, it's amazing. But these were absolute treasures, and so yeah, it's these are community stories. This isn't just about families, but there's community history there, you know, across the prairies and beyond. But it's yeah, there's a lot of treasures out there for sure. And in this particular case, it just struck me, you know, these are literally from 100 years ago. That's, you know, that's history that is just so valuable to, you know, to communities, I guess, and to families.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do not see any other hands up. So I would love to say a huge thank you to Paul for this great presentation, and Les as well. This is the dialogue between you two has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Sean.
And thank you, Les. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everyone who tuned in and with the excellent questions and stayed for the talk. And it's been a pleasure. And hopefully in the future, we'll meet in person in La Ronge as opposed to have to do this by Zoom.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you very much, everybody, and good night.
Thanks
Good night.
very much.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
That was
Thanks,
great.
everyone. Good stuff.
Good night.
Good night.